I'm on my way out to test the driver assistance systems in the new Skoda Elroq. The car is based on the MEB platform, just like the Volkswagen ID models, Audi, Seat, and the Ford Explorer, which I tested earlier this year. And I was actually quite impressed with the assistance systems in that one. But in my test of the Elroq so far, I've come across one thing that doesn't work quite optimally. And then there's also a feature that you simply can't get in this car, which I actually thought worked quite well in the Ford. I've also made a video where I go through the car both inside and out and take a look at the built-in software and navigation system, and there's a link to that down in the description. But now we'd better get to testing the assistance. Right before we head onto the highway, I've just pulled over so I can turn off these speed warnings and driver monitoring alerts, so they won't be beeping and chiming along the way. Fortunately, it's pretty easy here in the Skoda Elroq because they've actually made a button right down here at the front that I can press, and then I go straight into the driver assistance settings. And then I can just press here and here, and I've turned them off. Super easy. And actually it's really nice because the attention warning stays turned off even when I stop the car. So it's really only the speed warning I need to turn off if I don't want it activated. But now we'd better get going. Now I'm driving on the highway, and to activate the adaptive cruise control and lane assist, which Skoda calls travel assist, I have a little lever down here that I just need to pull back once, and then both adaptive cruise control and lane assist are active, and it automatically sets the speed to the allowed speed limit on this stretch of road. So it really couldn't be much easier to activate. I think that's exactly how it should be. You really don't see it done much better than this. If I want to change the set speed, I also do that with this little lever down here. If I push it up, I increase the speed by 10 kilometers per hour, and if I push it down, I decrease it by 10 kilometers per hour. At first, I couldn't figure out how to change the speed by 1 kilometer per hour, but you can actually do that as well. If I pull back on the lever when cruise control is active, each press increases the speed by 1 kilometer per hour, and if I press this button out at the end, I can reduce it by 1 kilometer per hour, unless I'm currently driving slower than the set speed, because then it sets it to the current speed. So that's something you need to be aware of, but if I'm driving at the speed set by the cruise control and press the small button out here, then it reduces the speed by 1 kilometer per hour. And if I want to adjust the distance to the vehicle in front, there's a small button on top of this little lever that I can press one way or the other to change the distance to the car ahead. And by the way, if I deactivate the adaptive cruise control and travel assist, if, for example, I have to brake manually, I can reactivate everything simply by pulling back on the little lever down here, and then I'm back at the current permitted speed with auto steering. That's how it should be. Now let's see how quickly the Skoda Elroq can find the lane again when I change lanes. It deactivates the auto steering as soon as I start to signal, and now I'm moving into the new lane, and then I turn off the indicator. And it finds it immediately. It's incredibly fast. It's probably one of the fastest I've tried. Let's just try one more time, just to see that it wasn't a fluke. I'm signaling in here. I'm in the lane, and now I turn off the indicator, and now it's picked up the lane markings. Really nice, and very fast. Unfortunately, this Skoda Elroq doesn't have automatic lane change like I had in the Ford Explorer I tested earlier this year. That actually worked really well, but according to Skoda, you simply can't get that in the Elroq at this point. So that's a bit of a letdown, because I actually thought it was really comfortable and something I could definitely see myself using when driving long distances. Another thing that has also disappointed me a bit is the touch-sensitive steering wheel, because it just doesn't work quite as well in the Skoda Elroq as it has in other cars I've tried. I like to have my hand down here when I'm driving long distances so I can relax my shoulders. And I've experienced many times that it kind of loses connection and can't detect that I have my hand on the steering wheel. I haven't experienced that in the same way with other cars, so it just doesn't work quite as well in the Elroq. I don't know if the sensor is different or if it just works worse here. Something else I also like to test is how the car handles narrow lanes. Because if you've ever driven through Germany, you've experienced long stretches with roadwork and extra narrow lanes. And there's a bit of roadwork coming up right here, where the outer lane is also narrower than usual. So let's just see how the Elroq handles it, whether it can still keep steering by itself, even though the lane is narrower than usual. Now we've moved into the narrow lane, and it found the lines just as quickly as it did before. And it immediately looks like it has no trouble keeping the steering, even in a much narrower lane like this one. So that's also really nice, because it can be quite annoying when you're driving on the Autobahn through Germany and then there's 10 kilometers of narrow lanes with an 80 km/h speed limit. So it's quite nice that the car can help you with the steering so you can relax your arms. But one thing is narrow lanes and another is wide lanes. When you have a motorway on-ramp here in Denmark, the lane briefly gets wider. So let's just see how the Elroq handles that. I expect it won't have any trouble with that either. And of course it doesn't. It was the same with the Ford Explorer. I'd say most modern cars can handle the steering just fine when the lane briefly gets wider like this. But in my old Fiat 500e, it just didn't work. The Skoda Elroq also has a blind spot assistant, and it's located here on the inside of the mirrors, which I actually think is a really good placement. Many cars have it out in the side mirror where it lights up, but this one is a bit further in and a bit closer, so it's actually more in my line of sight and therefore easier to see. And I really like that. We should also take a look at how overtaking works when you're driving with the adaptive cruise control. It should ideally speed up when I start to indicate that I want to overtake. And it does, and it also accelerates fairly quickly. It could be a bit faster, but I think it's just fine as it is. It's not like the BYD C-Line I tested, which was so slow that the guy behind me came up and flashed his lights at me. Here, I actually managed to pick up speed, so that's also as it should be. We should also see what the adaptive cruise control does if I have to quickly pull in behind a car in front that's driving slower. That is, into the inner lane close to a slow-moving car. Oh, it looks like this one wasn't actually driving slow enough. I've also tried it where I pulled in very close behind a car in front, and then it alerted me that I needed to brake, but it also braked by itself. Now I've gone out onto the country road to see how the Skoda Elroq's driver assistance systems handle smaller roads, where the terrain might be a bit hilly, and it may not be able to see the lane markings all the way because it's going a bit uphill or downhill. So let's try and see how it goes. It's going just fine, also as expected. It's quite good at finding the lane. Those are the experiences I've had so far, at least. Now let's try and see up here. I'm coming out of a 60 zone right here, where we're driving 60, and this 60 zone ends in just a moment. And that means I can drive 80. So let's see how it goes. Can it figure it out? It's telling me there's an 80 zone ahead, so it already knows. And now it's registered the zone, and then it increases the speed. So that's approved as well. Now we are coming up to a section where the speed limit changes to 60, then 70, and finally 80. So let's just see how it goes. It already knows about the 60 ahead, it says, and now it's registered it, so it increases the speed to 60. That's perfectly fine. Then comes the 70 kilometers sign just up ahead, and it knows that's there too. So it's prepared, and it's watching for when the sign appears and when it has registered the sign. Now it has. Then it increases the speed again. That's just as it should be. Perfect. And now we're leaving the 70 kilometers zone, and I can actually see that it knows that too. So I assume it now registers that we've passed the sign, and then it increases the speed to 80. Perfect. That's how it should be. That's not to say it can't sometimes make mistakes, because there are occasionally errors in these speed limit maps. And if there's an error in the map, then the car doesn't know any better than what's in the map. But otherwise, I have to say, this one is really, really good at reading the signs, and as long as the maps are accurate, well, then it also adjusts in advance. So that's exactly how it should be. Right now, we're driving at 60, but the car tells me there's a 50 kilometer zone ahead because there's a city sign, and it's already starting to slow down so that when I reach the city sign, we'll be driving at 50. So that's also exactly how it should be. As you can see, the adaptive cruise control also works all the way down to 0 km/h. It stops by itself, and it also starts up again, as long as I don't stay stopped for too long. That's also really nice when you're driving in traffic jams, for example, on the highway. Now I know that on the other side of this hill, we're entering a city zone where we're only allowed to drive 50. So let's see if the car knows that too. Right now it actually says, I can only drive 70, and it reduces the speed accordingly. But actually, that's not really indicated anywhere. Now it figured out that there was a 50 zone, and it also reduces the speed to 50. And that's the thing about the map data and what it thinks is on the road in terms of signs. It's only as good as the map data it can get. Now I'm approaching a roundabout up ahead. The car has already reduced the speed to 50 because I've entered a city zone, and it also tells me that there's a roundabout coming up. And that means it automatically lowers the speed even further. Now I just need to see if it's possible for me to enter the roundabout here. Yes, it is. I just need to get over into this lane. And I'm not touching either the accelerator or the brake. It's simply the car itself that has automatically reduced the speed to these 33 kilometers per hour so that I can drive safely around the roundabout without having to worry about the accelerator or the brake. It simply adjusts it by itself, and now it's increasing the speed again now that I've exited the roundabout. We should also see what happens if I don't respond to warnings to keep my hands on the steering wheel. So, if I were to have a medical emergency while driving with travel assist on, what happens then? Now it's saying, take over steering. I'm not doing anything here, so it'll probably start complaining in a moment. It's also beeping at me. And now it gives the car a small jolt by pressing on the brake a bit, and it also starts tugging on the seatbelt to alert me, and it says emergency assist, take over steering. It turns on the hazard lights. Oh, sorry, I just got a bit startled. It turns on the hazard lights, honks the horn, and slows down. It actually does everything it's supposed to. I don't think it pulled over to the side, but I think it pretty much did everything else. So it doesn't just keep driving if you don't respond. And I have to say, you'd really have to be pretty much asleep or feeling really unwell not to react to this, because as I said, it gives a jolt with the brake, the seatbelt tightener starts pulling on the belt like this, and then it also honks the horn and slows down. So you won't be able to keep driving if you're not conscious yourself when you're using travel assist. The last thing we need to try is to see how the auto steering handles smaller roads, like here, where there are no lane markings on the right side, just a shoulder or some curb out there. Can it handle that? And yes, it can. It can see that there are stripes on one side, and it can see that there's a shoulder on the other side, and it even shows an indication of the markings down in the display, and it steers the car nicely through the turn here. Now, it also reduces the speed to 50 because we've entered a city zone, so the limit has changed, and again, it's doing the right thing. Finally, let's take a look at how the auto steering handles slightly sharper turns on these small roads. Here, there are lane markings on both sides, so the conditions are better. But can it handle it? Of course, Skoda isn't promising full self-driving, so it's not something I expect, but it's quite fun to see how good or bad the cars are at handling these slightly sharper turns on these small roads. The speed limit is 40, and so far the car is actually handling it quite well. There haven't been any really sharp turns yet either, so let's see when we get to the end. It's still going pretty well. The lane markings aren't great here, so let's see how it handles that. It couldn't see that either. There was also glare and the lane markings weren't the best, so that's probably fair enough. It's already found the lane again. It's actually super quick at that, so that's really good. So let's just see this last turn here. It actually handles that just fine too, and it knows there's a roundabout further ahead. Now I think I'll take over so we don't damage the rims. It couldn't quite handle it, but okay. I have to say, it's actually one of the cars that's handled it the best. And here it also nicely reduces the speed, as you can see, approaching the roundabout, so that I don't have too much speed when I have to go through it. So that brings my week with the Skoda Elroq to an end. First of all, I want to say that if you still have prejudices about Skoda, then it's time to put them away, because the quality is really good. And in some respects, the Skoda models are actually better than the equivalent ones from Volkswagen. For example, with real buttons on the steering wheel. The car drives well, and the assistance systems, like in all cars built on Volkswagen's MEB platform, are class-leading. I was disappointed about the missing automatic lane change, but it turns out you can get it at the max trim level. The information I got from Skoda was wrong, but I just don't know what's going on with the touch-sensitive steering wheel in the Elroq. In none of the other cars I've tested with the same technology have I experienced so many times where the car couldn't detect that I had my hand on the steering wheel. So if that's important to you, make sure to test how it works when you take the car for a test drive. The software generally works fine, but I'm still not a fan of the fact that the estimated state of charge is hidden away under several taps, especially when there's really no reason for it. And it's honestly really disappointing that the filtering for charging providers still only has 2 options here in 2025. I also wish that the voice assistant could recognize well-known places, so I wouldn't have to know the address of the place I want to navigate to. But at least it understands Danish, so I do have the option to say an address. Of course, I'm also a bit spoiled because I'm used to Google Assistant, but it's just so convenient, since you might not always know the exact address of, for example, a theater, a restaurant, or a tourist attraction. But the Skoda Elroq is a great car, and you can get it with a large battery if you need it. And if one day they get their act together and update the software so that it matches, for example, the Google-based systems, then there really isn't much left to criticize. If you want to see an alternative to the Skoda Elroq, you can watch my review of the Ford Explorer by clicking right there. And would you like to support the channel and the work I do directly? Well, then I'm always happy for a cup of coffee. See you soon.